If you were to stop this video right now and just Google the name Hannah Up, who is the focus of today's story, it would bring up a list of articles about her very strange disappearance. And all of them would start with the partial explanation for what caused all of this craziness to happen. But what I'm going to do is basically the opposite. I'm going to tell you the craziness of what occurred from 2008 all the way up until today, 2020. And then I'm going to reveal the partial explanation that many people believe is behind the disappearance. Not only does that make for a more compelling story, just purely from an entertainment perspective, but it also allows you, the viewer, to have an unbiased view of the events that happen. So that when I do make this reveal, you can be the judge if that is sufficient to explain away what ultimately happened to Hannah Up. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel, because that's all I do, and I upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's something you'd be interested in, I would encourage you to steal the like button's favorite bar of soap, cover it in clear nail varnish, and then put it back and laugh at the like button when their soap doesn't lather. Also, subscribe to my channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story. Around midday on September 16, 2008, the captain of the Staten Island ferry in New York City was looking out at the water just south of Manhattan, and he noticed something bobbing in the water. And he said that it just didn't look right. He was drawn to it. It was pretty far away, but he knew that there was just something off about it. Couldn't tell if it was a person or debris, but either way, he sent 2 of his deckhands over to have a look. So they hopped in a skiff, they drove over, and very quickly they saw that it was actually a woman, and her face was in the water. So as soon as they pulled up alongside her, the first thing they did is grabbed her head and kind of pulled it out of the water, and to their surprise, she gasped for air. They pulled her up into the skiff. She had on just running shorts and a sports bra. She had a very bad sunburn on one side of her body. She was hypothermic. She was dehydrated, and she looked like she had been in the water for a very long time. They bring her back to the ferry, they wrap her up in a blanket, and they call 911, and an ambulance is immediately sent out to go get her. As they're waiting for the ambulance, she starts to speak. I was just out for a run. I went running just a couple hours ago. Why am I here? They chalked it up to her being in shock, and based on her attire, she had running shorts and a sports bra on, they're thinking, okay, I don't know how she wound up in the water, but it seems like she went running, fell in the water somehow, and thank goodness we found her. She gets in the ambulance, they bring her to the hospital, and after the initial treatment is done and she's stable and laying in bed and being treated for hypothermia and for this bad sunburn, she starts saying to nurses and doctors she had just gone running like a couple hours ago. How did I get here? Why was I in the water? And they didn't know either. Finally, when she was able to confirm that she was in fact Hannah Up, and they got in touch with her family, who also confirmed that this girl sitting in the hospital bed is in fact Hannah Up, investigators were baffled because Hannah Up had been missing for 3 weeks, not 1 day. When they said this to Hannah, she couldn't believe it. At first, everyone was okay with Hannah not being able to remember because she just went through something traumatic. We'll give her a couple of days and then we'll reapproach the subject. But as time went on, it became clear that Hannah had absolutely no clue what happened over a 3-week period that she had been missing. 3 weeks before she was found, she had left her apartment in New York City to go for a run. This was the day before she was set to start a new school year at her school in Harlem. When Hannah did not return to her apartment that night, her roommates actually didn't think much of it. From what I can tell, the roommates were not particularly close, and it wasn't unusual for them to kind of have limited interaction. 4 days would go by before Hannah's roommates would notice that she still hasn't come back. So the first thing they did is they went into her bedroom inside of the apartment, and they quickly were able to find that her passport was in there, her wallet with her cash, bank cards, her ID. Basically, all of the most important items that you would carry with you anywhere you went were sitting in her room. At this point, they called the police, and a massive, massive search is ignited for this woman. Hannah was beloved, not only by her family, but everywhere she went, her students loved her. All of her friends would say that Hannah was their best friend. Everybody she was around loved her. She was the center of attention, life of the party. And so when she became a missing person, people came out of the woodwork to go look for this woman. They looked everywhere. And after a week, The family and friends were starting to lose hope, and the police would admit that at that point, they were just looking for a body. They assumed that she had been the victim of some horrible crime. Her case, her missing person case, had made national headlines because it didn't really make any sense. There was absolutely no trace of her. She'd just gone running and then vanished. And despite living in New York City, where there's cameras everywhere and witnesses everywhere, they couldn't find any footage of her. They had no leads. No one came forward. The New York Times would say it was as if the city had opened wide and swallowed her whole. Then there was this huge break in the case because there was an Apple store in Midtown Manhattan that spotted her clearly entering their store and logging into one of their computers. They saw that she logged in with her email address, but on that computer there was no record of her sending or receiving any messages. But she did successfully log in. And oddly enough, one of the people that went to school with her approached her and was like, Hannah? Hannah, is that you? You know, there's a huge search for you. Is this really you? Hannah, on camera, looks at him and says, no, I'm not Hannah. And she ups and walks away. Police show up. There's no sign of Hannah. She's gone. Police took the footage and showed it to Hannah's mother, and she recognized her 100%. That is Hannah. But no one could understand, why would she deny being Hannah? Is she being held hostage? A day later, she popped up on the security camera at a Starbucks in Manhattan. But just like the Apple store, by the time the report got to the police and they went to the Starbucks, she was gone. Same thing happened at a number of Manhattan gyms where she was apparently going and using their shower and then leaving. And she somehow was able to get inside the gym, but she didn't have her gym pass. So they don't know how she got in. And again, every time police showed up, she'd be gone. And there's lots of other unanswered questions. How are you able to do anything? You don't have your license, you don't have your wallet, you don't have bank cards, you don't have a passport. We don't know where you're sleeping, where you're staying. How are you eating? What are you doing? Where are you coming from? What's wrong? While police were never able to determine where she had been sleeping at night in those first couple of weeks, they did determine that at some point towards the end of this 3-week period, she decided to leave Manhattan. And so she jumped into a kayak off of Chelsea Pier and began paddling south. And at some point, we don't know when, she jumped out of the kayak and began swimming south. And after several hours of swimming, she wound up at Robbins Reef, which is this incredibly isolated lighthouse that sits on this tiny little rocky island. She managed to pull herself up onto the island and then sat there on these rocks for almost 24 hours. This is where police believe she got the really bad sunburn. Then some event led to her getting back in the water and kind of bobbing and drifting her way all the way back over to the south side of Manhattan, where she was ultimately spotted and then rescued by the ferry captain. It took police and investigators quite a bit of time to put together this storyline of what happened to Hannah over those 3 weeks. And when they brought it to her and her family and said, this is what we think happened to you, she still had no idea how any of this had happened. She thought she'd gone running, and then the same day she wound up in the water and was being rescued. While she was at the hospital, she had undergone a series of brain imaging tests to try to see what they could find, if there was some underlying neurological condition that might have caused her to forget this huge chunk of time. But the tests revealed no neurological issues. They concluded that the episode was psychological in nature. Because her case had made national headlines just when she had gone missing in the first place, and then had been found under such baffling conditions, not only physically where she was located, but her inability to remember any of it, it created even more buzz around the whole story. And so people began to think she was lying or that she had staged the whole thing, but she hadn't. She just didn't understand why it had happened. But as time went on, people forgot about it, people moved on, and she was able to more or less go back to a normal life, even though she herself was very unsettled at the idea that she had 20 days that she has no memory of. Fast forward almost exactly 5 years to September of 2013, and now Hannah is living in Maryland. She is an assistant teacher at a Montessori school, and Hannah goes missing again. On the day she went missing, co-workers claimed to have seen her just a couple miles away from the school, and they assumed that she was walking to work. But she didn't show up for work that day, and when they tried calling her, she didn't pick up. They went to her apartment, she wasn't there, and so just like 5 years earlier, they called the police and they launched a search for Hannah up. Early on in the search, police located Hannah's phone and wallet sitting on a walking path relatively close to where she worked. But they started searching the area and they could not find her. 2 days after the search started, Hannah's mother received a phone call from a number she didn't recognize. When she picked it up, it was her daughter. And she said, "I don't know where I am, I don't know what's going on, but I'm okay." Hannah had regained her memory while laying in a creek bed next to a turned over shopping cart in some random park in Maryland, not the one where her phone and wallet were found. She had stood up, had no idea how she got there, and she flagged down a stranger and asked to use their phone and was able to call her mother. Her family, her friends, the police were all so relieved that she was found and unharmed that, much like the last one, she ultimately was released from the hospital because she wasn't hurt and was able to more or less move back into a normal life. Except Hannah at this point felt really guilty. She didn't understand why this was happening, but she felt really bad about it. And it was clear to her family and friends that she really wished she could somehow have a do-over. Just start fresh and start a new life where no one knew her as this person who keeps disappearing. A year after the Maryland incident, Hannah would move to the U.S. Virgin Islands, a popular location for Americans that want to start again or go off the grid. She was able to land a job teaching at a Montessori school teaching 3 to 6-year-old children, and the director of the program would say that whenever they brought a family on a tour of the different classrooms, Hannah's classroom was always the first one they went to because she was such a great example of what children would expect if they came to this Montessori school. Because Hannah was not just a great teacher, she was a passionate teacher. She loved teaching, she loved her students, and she loved her new life in the Virgin Islands. But in September 2017, 9 years after her disappearance in New York and 4 years after her disappearance in Maryland, Hannah would go missing for a third time. Now, the lead up to this disappearance is a little bit unique relative to the other two. Right before she disappeared, there was a Category 5 hurricane barreling down on the Virgin Islands. And all of Hannah's friends, colleagues, everyone she knew was scrambling to leave the islands before it hit. But Hannah was not prepared to abandon the island and abandon her house and her school, and so she decides to stay behind. In the final few days before all of her friends and colleagues left the island, they described Hannah as being in some sort of a trance. She was hard to get through to, hard to speak to, but she seemed rather sing-songy, like she was in a really good mood, but very difficult to communicate with. On September 15th, just a few days before the hurricane would actually make landfall, the few staff members of the Montessori school who had stayed behind on the island to weather the storm called a meeting, and Hannah was not present. She was last seen preparing her Montessori classroom for the imminent impact of the hurricane. When they went to her apartment, she wasn't there, and so they went out looking for her. One of her friends knew that a favorite location of Hannah's was Sapphire Beach. And when she got there, sure enough, there was Hannah's car parked in the parking lot with her purse, passport, and hundreds of dollars inside of her car. Hannah's clothes were found down on the beach on a chair, neatly folded, but there was no sign of Hannah anywhere. A desperate search for Hannah was launched, led by the Coast Guard, but it had to be abandoned after only a couple of days because the hurricane was barreling down on them. And to this day, she has never been seen or heard from again. There's a huge part of this story that I've intentionally left out until right now. After Hannah was scooped up by the ferry captain and brought to the hospital after that first disappearance in 2008, they ran all those brain tests and they discovered that there was nothing wrong with her from a neurological standpoint. However, they did run a series of psychological tests and they discovered that she had an extremely rare form of amnesia called dissociative fugue. For those that suffer it, there are no symptoms leading up to it, and then all of a sudden, you forget all of your autobiographical information, but you don't forget how to live. Someone in a fugue state could very easily leave their apartment, go to a store, interact with other people. They just don't understand who they are. They don't know their name. They don't know their history. They don't know why they are located where they are. This can last for a couple of hours, all the way to years. The most famous example of dissociative fugue is Jason Bourne from the big blockbuster movies about the CIA operative who wakes up and has no idea who he is or why he is where he is. He doesn't know the people around him, but he recalls all of his training and is able to be this like ninja who can fight off bad guys left and right but doesn't know who he is. Now, when Hannah disappeared in 2008, almost certainly she was in a fugue state and then was located again, and thankfully she was alive. 5 years later, Same thing happens in Maryland. She goes into a fugue state, and then 2 days later she's found again, has no idea how she got where she got, but there she was. Now the tricky part is, in 2017 when she went missing, it would be very easy to say that she was in a fugue state because it had already happened 2 times before. However, other people believe that she just wanted to start her life over again. She hated being known only for her 2 disappearances. She wanted to be known as a happy, loving person, a great teacher, a great friend. And none of that was possible with her history. And so some say that she staged the last disappearance because she knew with the hurricane coming in that she would be able to kind of disappear without a trace, and people would assume that she was probably dead. So I'd love to get your take on what happened to Hannah Up, specifically what happened the 3rd time she disappeared. Was this just another example of her being in a fugue state and disappearing? And will we hear from her again? Or did she stage all of this to run away from Hannah Up and start all over again with a brand new identity, not tethered to the history that she really would like to forget? Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll do my best to get back to as many of you as I possibly can. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, then I would encourage you to steal the like button's favorite bar of soap, cover it in clear nail varnish, and then replace it, and laugh at the like button when their soap doesn't lather. Also, please subscribe to my channel and turn on all post notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly 3 to 4, even 5 video uploads that sound an awful lot like what you just listened to today. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram. My handle is johnballin416. I also post quite a bit over on TikTok, where my handle is Mr. Ballin. So whether I see you on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, or some combination, I'm just very thankful for your support. And until next time, see you guys.